Sometimes I wonder if everything would have been different if my dad hadn't died that spring morning. I was only 6, but I remember it as if it happened yesterday. Sunday smelled of fresh pancakes, warm milk, and my mom's perfume. Dad, wearing a kitchen apron that looked ridiculous on him, was flipping golden circles of batter with a concentrated expression, then skillfully drawing funny faces on them with chocolate. I giggled, my eyes wide with delight, while Mom hummed something gentle as she set the table. "Rita, princess, come help," his voice rang out, full of warm playfulness. "Your old man has flipped these masterpieces." He waved the spatula like a magic wand, inviting me to join the morning enchantment. I tossed my favorite stuffed bunny onto the couch and rushed to the kitchen, eager to be Dad's little helper. And then it happened. The spatula clattered to the floor. Dad suddenly froze, his face contorted in pain. His hand clutched at his chest, fingers digging into the fabric of his t-shirt as if trying to hold on to something, to stop something. I watched, unable to move, as he began to collapse onto the floor. Everything that followed became a chaotic blur of images and sounds. The wail of ambulance sirens. Mom sobbing in a way I had never seen before. Hospital corridors, smelling of antiseptic and anxiety. People in white coats speaking words I couldn't understand, but whose weight I felt in every fiber of my being. Dad was gone. Just vanished. And our home, once filled with laughter, suddenly became too big, too empty, too quiet. Mom didn't cry for long. Maybe she simply didn't allow herself to grieve. Life had to go on. She met Gaston in a support group for widowed parents. He was tall, cheerful, with kind eyes that reminded me of Dad. I watched him with childish suspicion, but he turned out to be patient and caring. A year later, he moved in with us, and I tried to get used to his presence, to the fact that he now lived in a house that still smelled of Dad's aftershave. But the biggest shock was yet to come. "You're going to be a big sister." Mom beamed as she announced the news. I didn't know what to say. I was 8, and until that moment, Mom had belonged only to me. But when Umberto was born, she began to disappear, dissolving into caring for him. She quit her job. "Umberto needs me," she would say whenever someone questioned her decision. "These early years are the most important for a child." I wanted to ask if my early years had been just as important. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I silently watched as Mom's world shrank until it became a tiny universe orbiting solely around my brother. She forgot to pack my lunch for school. Sometimes, I sat in the cafeteria, watching other kids open their neat lunchboxes filled with sandwiches and fruit, while I had nothing. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry," Mom would say absent-mindedly at dinner, already turning back to Umberto. I was so busy with his doctor's appointment. It wasn't just once or twice. It became our new normal. Gaston noticed. I saw how he watched Mom with a worried expression as she fussed over my brother, completely ignoring me. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table struggling with my homework, Gaston came over and sat beside me. "You know, Rita," he said quietly, leaning in, "sometimes people get so caught up in one thing that they forget to see what else they might be missing." I didn't say anything, but his words stuck with me. As Umberto grew, the tension in the house became unbearable. Gaston tried to talk to Mom, but every conversation ended the same way. Mom got defensive, angry, refusing to admit she was obsessed with her younger son. I remember one dinner particularly well. Umberto, who was 5 at the time, lazily pushed his fork through his mashed potatoes, shaping them into figures. Mom leaned over him, coaxing him to take another bite, her voice filled with soft, almost pleading insistence. "Sarah," Gaston set his fork down and looked at Mom with his usual quiet concern, "we need to talk about this. You can't keep hovering over him like this. He needs to learn to do things on his own." Mom's face immediately hardened. I knew that look, tense, cold, as if Gaston had just made an unforgivable mistake. "What are you trying to say?" Her voice was dangerously even, almost sharp. "That I'm a bad mother?" "That's not what I mean, and you know it." Gaston straightened, crossing his arms. His voice was calm, but I could hear the hidden exhaustion in it. "But you have 2 children, not just one. And a husband, by the way." I pretended to be deeply fascinated by my mashed potatoes, but of course, I caught every single word. "Umberto is still so young," Mom snapped, casting me a fleeting glance. I was young too, I muttered under my breath, but no one heard me. The conversation changed nothing, but the situation reached a breaking point when Gaston suggested signing Umberto up for Little League Baseball. I was sitting on the stairs with a textbook on my lap, pretending to do my homework, when I overheard their argument downstairs. "Absolutely not." Mom's voice rang with tension. "Do you have any idea how dangerous baseball is? He could get hit by the ball, twist his ankle, or, for God's sake." "Sarah, he needs to experience life," Gaston interrupted, his tone growing firmer. "You can't protect him from everything." But Mom wouldn't budge. Instead of baseball, she enrolled Umberto in an art class at the community center. I still remember his sour expression as he sat there, absent-mindedly dragging a brush across the paper while the other kids actually tried to learn something. He lasted 3 sessions before Mom blamed the teacher for failing to understand her son's creative spirit. Meanwhile, Gaston started spending more time with me. Maybe it was his way of balancing out Mom's behavior, or maybe he simply saw a child who desperately needed someone in her corner. He took me to karate lessons 3 times a week, always sitting in the stands, never missing a single practice. I saw the way his eyes lit up with pride when I earned new belts, how he cheered louder than any other parent when I executed a perfect throw. But while I thrived under his attention, Umberto changed. He became irritable, unruly. His room turned into a battlefield, clothes scattered everywhere, toys lying where he had tossed them, and Mom would look at the mess, then turn to me. "Rita, sweetheart," she'd say with a gentle but unwavering tone, "Umberto is so busy. You don't mind helping out and tidying up his room, do you?" She wasn't asking. She was telling me. I cleaned because I knew that if I refused, she would make me do it anyway. But one day, Gaston found out. "She's not his maid, Sarah," he said firmly. "He needs to learn to clean up after himself." Mom flared up. I saw her shoulders tense, saw the flicker of anger in her eyes. "How can you say that?" Her voice trembled. "I always knew you loved her more than your own son." Gaston froze. For a moment, I thought he would yell, that he wouldn't be able to hold it in, but instead, I saw the light fade from his eyes. It was as if he gave up. "Fine. Have it your way," he said quietly. After that, he never argued with Mom about Umberto again. Graduation day was bittersweet. I stood in my cap and gown, feeling the June breeze stir the thin fabric, scanning the crowd. Everywhere, families were celebrating, parents embracing their children, siblings posing for pictures, friends laughing as they tossed their caps into the air. My gaze found Gaston. He stood a little off to the side, but his face shone with pride. I saw him smile, saw him clap, saw the joy in his eyes, genuine, unfiltered happiness for me. Mom was there too, but her attention was scattered. She kept glancing down, checking her phone. She was probably texting Umberto's nanny. He was too sensitive to attend my ceremony. Later that evening, when the house had settled into its usual silence, Gaston called me into his study. "I've been saving," he said, pulling out a folder filled with college brochures. "You can go wherever you want, Rita. There are no limits for you." I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could say a word, Mom burst into the room. "You can't be serious." Her voice rang with outrage. That money should be saved for Umberto's future. He'll need it more. Gaston tensed, and his face took on the expression I had grown too familiar with over the years, stone-cold resolve, edged with exhaustion. "This is not up for discussion, Sarah," he said evenly. "I've already made my decision. I chose Marshall University in West Virginia. Far enough to start over, but not so far that I couldn't come home once in a while." On the day I left, Gaston helped me move into my dorm. He carried boxes, made sure I had everything I needed, told me stories about his own college years. Mom didn't come. "Umberto was anxious about your leaving," Mom explained over the phone as I was unpacking my things in my new room. I just nodded, even though she couldn't see me. College life was exactly what I needed. For the first time, I felt free. No one expected sacrifices from me, no one asked me to clean up after my brother, no one put me second. I called home every week, but most of my conversations were with Gaston. Mom was too busy with Umberto. "Your brother is going through a rough time," Gaston explained during one of our calls. His voice sounded tired. "He's hanging out with these kids, the wrong kind. Have you tried getting him involved in any extracurricular activities?" I asked, already guessing his answer. "Yes, but your mother." "Let me guess," I cut in. "She said you were being too strict with him?" "Exactly," he sighed. "She called me a tyrant for suggesting he might need some structure. She says I don't understand how sensitive he is." I visited home less and less. Each time, Umberto seemed even more withdrawn. He barely acknowledged my existence, locking himself in his room, surrounded by flashing screens. When I knocked, he wouldn't even open the door. "Umberto, want a piece of pie?" I asked one day, hoping to get through to him. The only response was the sound of gunfire from his game. "He's not in the mood to talk," Mom shrugged as she passed by. "He's under a lot of stress. You know how he is." The contrast between our lives couldn't have been starker. I was building a career, while Umberto was chasing virtual achievements. And Mom enabled it with endless excuses. The frustration on Gaston's face spoke volumes. But by then, even he seemed to have given up. By the time I was 27, I had fully settled in West Virginia. I had a good job in consulting, my own apartment, and clear goals. I had finally saved enough for a down payment on my first home. It was a small one-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood, neat white walls, a narrow balcony, and a tiny kitchen, but it was mine. The day I got the keys, I couldn't stop smiling. Years of skipping lunch takeout, saying no to designer clothes, working late shifts, and sticking to a strict budget had finally paid off. "You all have to come see it," I said during my weekly call home. "I'm having a housewarming party next Saturday. I'll cook dinner. Gaston, I'll even make your favorite lasagna," I added with a smile. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, kiddo." His voice was warm, comforting, and I knew he meant it. But then Mom's voice chimed in over the line. "Oh, sweetheart, I don't think we'll be able to make it. Umberto has plans that day." I couldn't hide my skepticism. "Plans? What kind of plans?" "Very important ones," she said vaguely, and in the background, I heard the sharp, aggressive sounds of a video game. I swallowed my irritation. On the day of the housewarming, only Gaston showed up. He brought a potted plant and a bottle of wine as a gift. "Your mom sends her love," he said, setting the gifts on the kitchen table. We both knew it was a lie. Over dinner, as the rich aroma of hot lasagna filled the tiny kitchen, Gaston told me what was really happening at home. "He's 20, Rita, and he hasn't even tried to apply to college," he sighed, twirling pasta onto his fork. "He plays all day, sometimes hangs out with friends who, trust me, are bad news." "Have you tried helping him?" "Of course. I even offered him a job at my construction company, just as a starting point. But Sarah. He shook his head. Sarah said it would be beneath him. I dropped my fork. Wait, what? Gaston gave a sad chuckle. According to her, Umberto is too smart for manual labor. Too smart to work. I felt something tighten in my chest, a mix of anger, exhaustion, and disbelief. But not too smart to live off his parents, I muttered. Gaston just shook his head. I keep trying, Rita. God knows, I keep trying. That was our last real conversation. 2 years later, I got the call. Gaston is in the hospital. Mom's voice was hoarse. He had a heart attack. My heart clenched, as if gripped by icy fingers. I dropped everything and caught the first flight out. But by the time I reached the hospital, he was already gone. The funeral felt surreal. Mom put on a full performance, crying loudly, clutching people's hands, telling anyone who would listen what a wonderful husband Gaston had been. We were so happy, she wailed. How will we go on without him? I watched her with a mix of disgust and pity. Her tears weren't for Gaston. I saw the gears of calculation turning behind her grief. Gaston had been the sole provider. Now he was gone. How was she planning to support Umberto's lifestyle now? Umberto didn't even bother wearing a suit to the funeral. He showed up in a wrinkled polo shirt and slacks that had seen better days, spending most of the service glued to his phone. He's grieving in his own way, Mom justified, shooting me a sharp look, wanting me not to say anything. I stayed silent. Standing by Gaston's grave, I couldn't help but think how history was repeating itself. Another father. Another heart attack. Another funeral. Only this time, I was old enough to see things clearly. Including the fact that Mom's tears were more about her bank account than her broken heart. A year passed after Gaston's death, and my connection to Mom and Umberto had all but disappeared. The little I knew came from the occasional snippets in Aunt Linda's calls. They're living off Gaston's savings, she mentioned one day, her voice casual, though I could hear the strain behind it. Your mother sold his Chevrolet last month. The tools from his workshop, before that. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I didn't care. Or at least, I convinced myself I didn't. But when Mom's name flashed on my phone screen one random Tuesday night, my heart still skipped a beat. Rita. Her voice was quieter than I remembered, as if the last remnants of her usual confidence had worn away. I need you to come home. Something in her tone made me book a ticket without hesitation. When I pulled up to our old house, I barely recognized it. The once pristine lawn that Gaston had carefully trimmed was now overgrown with weeds. Paint peeled from the window frames, one of the shutters hung crookedly, swaying ominously in the wind. The front door, once gleaming with fresh lacquer, was now streaked with grime. But the worst part wasn't the house itself. When Mom opened the door, I had to suppress a gasp. The woman standing before me looked 20 years older than her actual age. Deep wrinkles lined her face, her eyes sunken into dark hollows. Her hair, which she had always meticulously dyed and styled, now revealed unkempt gray roots. Come in, she said, leading me into the living room. The house smelled stale. Dishes were piled up in the sink, and a thin layer of dust covered the furniture. Absent-mindedly, I ran a finger across the coffee table and felt the gray residue cling to my skin. It was especially striking, considering that Mom used to make me rewash plates if even a single water spot remained. Mom. I glanced around as I sat down on the couch, only for a spring to jab sharply into my thigh. Gaston would have fixed that immediately. What's going on? Mom folded her hands on her lap, nervously clenching and unclenching her fingers. It broke almost right away, she mumbled, as if answering my unspoken thoughts. Everything started falling apart. She lifted her eyes to me. We're running out of money, Rita. My pension barely covers the utilities and the savings. She bit her lip. There's almost nothing left. I stared at her, feeling that old, familiar exhaustion creeping in. What about Umberto? Is he helping with the expenses? Her expression froze in a complicated dance between embarrassment and defense. He's looking for a job. It's not his fault. These employers, they just don't understand him. I felt my jaw tighten. What do you mean, don't understand? Well, the last place expected him to start work at 8 in the morning. You know he's not a morning person. And the one before that. She nervously shifted the salt shaker on the table. They wanted him to do manual labor. With his intelligence. Mom, I struggled to keep my irritation in check. At his age, with no experience, he doesn't get to be that picky. You don't understand. Her voice instantly sharpened into the tone I remembered from childhood. He's special. Then, just as suddenly, her tone softened. Rita, we need your help. I knew this was coming. We won't survive without it. I hate to ask, but you're doing so well in your career. I closed my eyes. Part of me wanted to remind her of all the times she had chosen Umberto over me. Of the days I went hungry at school because she forgot to pack my lunch. Of the times she made me clean his room because he was too busy. Of how she hadn't bothered to come to my housewarming party but always made time for her son's whims. But looking at her worn-out face, at her hands trembling with nervous tension, at the desperation in her eyes, I couldn't do it. How much do you need? I asked, my own voice sounding foreign to me. $1,500 a month. I nearly choked on air. That was a significant portion of my salary. But I nodded anyway. Where's Umberto? I asked as I stood up, already regretting my decision. Mom's face brightened. Oh, he's at an interview, she said with a hint of pride. A very promising position at a tech company. Through the window, I could see the glow of Umberto's bedroom light and the familiar flicker of his computer screen. Some things never changed. True to my word, I set up an automatic transfer of $1,500 to Mom's account every month. Every time I saw the deduction in my banking app, I reminded myself I was doing the right thing, even if it meant postponing my own plans, like buying a bigger apartment or a new car. I started visiting more often, but each trip felt like stepping into a time capsule. Umberto was always there. Either glued to a screen or sprawled out on the couch with a beer in his hand. How's the job search going? I would ask. Mind your own business, he would snap, or just grunt and turn the volume up on his game. During the holidays, I couldn't stand the sight of the living room in such disrepair, wallpaper peeling, a dark water stain creeping across the ceiling, something that would have driven Gaston insane. I spent my Christmas bonus hiring contractors to fix everything. Then in February, Mom twisted her ankle. Oh, it's not that bad, she said when I called, though I could hear the pain in her voice. Is Umberto helping you? He's busy, with some online interviews. The next day, I hired a housekeeper for Mom. The money I had saved for a vacation went straight to covering her salary for the next 3 weeks. And then came the day I walked into the house and saw a stranger sprawled out on the couch. She looked like she had just stepped off a reality show. Long acrylic nails sharp enough to be used as weapons. Heavy makeup. Clothes that left little to the imagination. She was scrolling through her phone, surrounded by empty chip bags and soda cans. Who are you? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Umberto emerged from his room. This is Candy, he announced. My fiancée. She lives here now. Candy didn't even look up from her phone. She just popped her gum loudly. I watched in disbelief as she lazily reached into the grocery bag I had just brought in and pulled out the high-end cookies I had bought for Mom. "Nice to meet you," I muttered under my breath. Later that evening, I called Mom to hear her thoughts on the situation. "Oh, Rita," her voice sounded more animated than I had heard in months. "Isn't it wonderful? Umberto is finally settling down." I closed my eyes for a moment, suppressing a tired sigh. "Candy has been such a good influence on him," Mom continued enthusiastically. "He hasn't gone out drinking with those awful friends in weeks." "That's because she's drinking all my imported beer at home," I thought, recalling the empty bottles I had seen in the trash. But I kept my mouth shut. "And he's talking about getting a job," Mom added excitedly. "Really?" I tried not to sound too skeptical. "Yes," she confirmed. "Candy's cousin knows someone at a tech startup. Umberto says this could be his big break." I made a noncommittal sound, remembering the dozens of big breaks he had mentioned over the years. But Mom was so happy living in her bubble of eternal hope that I didn't have the heart to burst it. My next visit home started like any other. I was juggling grocery bags, trying to push the front door open with my shoulder, but the moment I stepped inside, I froze. The house looked like a tornado had torn through it. Dirty dishes were piled high in the sink, half-eaten takeout containers littered every surface. Clothes were scattered on the floor, as if someone had knocked them off the drying rack and just left them there. The air was thick with the stench of stale food, leftover beer, and something sickly sweet, probably Candy's perfume. I stepped into the living room and saw her. Candy was stretched out on the couch, her perfectly manicured nails tapping lazily against her phone screen. She didn't even glance up as I set the groceries down on the kitchen table. I clenched my jaw. "You know," I said, not bothering to hide my irritation, "you live here. You eat the food I pay for. The least you could do is wash a few dishes." Candy slowly lifted her gaze. A smirk played on her heavily painted lips. "Who do you think you are, coming in here and giving orders?" I tensed. "This isn't your home," I said coolly. "I grew up here. You're just a guest." Candy laughed. A sharp, triumphant sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, sweetheart, you've got it all wrong." She leaned back lazily into the couch. "This house belongs to Umberto." A cold shiver ran down my spine. "What?" "The will," she said, dragging out the words like she was savoring every syllable. I turned and walked straight to the kitchen. Mom sat at the table, spreading out a stack of coupons in front of her, coupons she clearly had never used. "Is it true?" My voice sounded foreign to me. She didn't look at me right away, still shuffling through the papers. But then something in her expression hardened. "Yes," she said evenly. I couldn't believe it. "I help you," my voice wavered. "I send you money every month. Umberto doesn't work. He doesn't contribute anything. Don't you dare talk about your brother like that." Mom's head snapped up, her eyes flashing. I straightened. "He's a leech, Mom. He's perfectly happy living off my money while his girlfriend destroys our home." "Oh, stop being so dramatic." We stared at each other. Her face twisted into a strange expression, somewhere between exhaustion and disdain. "You want the truth," she hissed. "I never loved you the way I love Umberto." The words hit like a physical blow. "He is better than you in every way that matters." I froze. "And I don't want to see you here again." Something inside my chest cracked. All these years, I had told myself that Mom loved me. That she just showed it differently. That beneath her obsession with Umberto, she still cared about me. Now I knew better. I turned and walked out. Candy's triumphant laughter followed me down the hallway. The drive home was a blur. I didn't remember the 4-hour trip, Didn't remember climbing the stairs to my apartment. Didn't even remember sitting on my couch. But I do remember the moment of clarity that struck me as I stared at my phone. At the automatic $1,500 transfer I had been sending Mom every month for the past year. My finger hovered over the screen for a second. And then, with finality, I pressed Cancel Recurring Payment. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into work. And for the first time in a long time, the gap in my budget didn't feel like a burden. It felt like an opportunity. I started researching ways to invest the money I had once sent home. Maybe I could finally start saving for a house. A real house. Not just an apartment. I imagined a spacious living room with large windows, a bright kitchen where I could cook dinners for friends, a cozy reading nook with a chair by a bookshelf. It felt like a distant future. But for the first time in my life, it felt achievable. Exactly 1 month after my last visit home, Mom called. The money didn't come through, she said without preamble. No, hello. No, how are you? It must be a mistake at the bank. No mistake, I said, surprised by how steady my voice was. I canceled the transfers. Silence. And then she exploded. How dare you? After everything I've done for you? I actually laughed. Everything you've done for me? You mean as a mother who forgot I existed? As a woman who made me Umberto's maid? Or as the person who looked me in the eye and told me she never loved me? That's different, she shrieked, slipping into her familiar, defending Umberto voice. You know I was upset. But you can't just stop helping us. I heard her take a deep breath, clearly preparing for her next speech. We rely on that money, Rita. Umberto and Candy are planning a vacation to Cancun, and they need a vacation? My voice turned ice cold. Yes, they're so exhausted, so much stress. Umberto is exhausted? I cut her off. Exhausted from what? Video games? Beer? She gasped. How can you say that about your brother? You're just jealous because. Because what, Mom? A long pause. Because you abandoned us. You left everything on him. I let out a dry laugh. Perfect. You made your choice, Mom. Now let him take care of you. Her voice shot up into a furious screech. You're ungrateful, selfish. The rest of her rant dissolved into a storm of accusations and demands. I let her rage for a moment, then calmly said, Goodbye, Mom. And I blocked her number before she could respond. But Mom wasn't done. Over the next few weeks, the messages started flooding in from every possible channel. On Facebook, she posted about how hard it was to pay the bills. On Instagram, she left comments under my photos, accusing me of being a terrible daughter. Her emails were filled with long-winded stories about the sacrifices she had made for me, most of which I couldn't remember because they had never actually happened. Then Umberto joined in. He sent an aggressive text. You're tearing this family apart. Mom is crying because of you. You better start sending money again. I blocked him too. But not before replying. Here's a crazy idea, try getting a job. Even Candy tried to reach out. Through LinkedIn. Of all places. She sent a long message about how I had broken a poor mother's heart and how Umberto is too sensitive to handle the stress of working right now. I had to admire her creativity. But I simply deleted the message without bothering to reply. It's been 6 months. I don't know how they're doing. And for the first time in my life, I don't feel guilty about it. Maybe they finally realized that Umberto needs to support himself. Or maybe they're still waiting for me to cave and start sending money again. Maybe they found someone else to manipulate. But the truth is, I don't need to know. I only know one thing. The $1,500 I used to send them every month went toward the down payment on my own home. I sleep better at night. I no longer wake up to angry messages or guilt-tripping calls. I know Gaston would be proud of me for finally standing up for myself. The other day, I drove past a construction site and saw "Now Hiring" sign. For a second, I considered taking a picture and sending it to Umberto. But then I just smiled and kept driving. Their problems are no longer mine. Finally, after all these years, I am free. Leave a comment with your thoughts on this story, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give it a like. See you soon.